I am the founder of a local brand called Artclub and Friends, and a huge part of what we do is collaborate, whether that's with artists, whether that's with artisans, whether that's with brands. It's something I believe very strongly in and I'm very passionate about it. So I'm excited to be on this end of a panel this time around, and I get to ask some exciting questions. So we will be chatting with you guys very informally. I'm not an academic. I only speak in layman's terms. So I think that will make for a really nice, transparent conversation today. And then if you have any burning questions, please don't forget them. Keep them towards the end. And then, we can open up some questions to the floor. Cool. So this morning, I wrote some notes here because I personally am very excited by the panel we have today. I think in terms of collaborations, I was thinking about it last night. Collaborations come in many forms and they exist for many reasons. And what's really special about our panel today is in terms of the three sort of aspects of a collaboration, often the artist, the brand, and the facilitators. We have a strong representative on our panel today of each of those categories. So this morning, I really wanted to start with Lulama, an incredible artist who I've finally got to meet. Firstly, I wanted to say congratulations on the collaboration you did with H&M. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how that came about?
Sure.
Can you hear?
Okay.
So.
The collaboration with H&M was maybe a 2-year project that was a... Thank you.
There you go.
The H&M collaboration was a 2-year project that kind of happened in phases. Mm-hmm. And we started ideating and conceptualizing on different objects for different parts of the world. And we covered the main stores around the world. And they chose 2 artists, one from New York and then me. And we created various objects that we could kind of bring our art into these objects. And I think it was probably one of the most challenging, but so rewarding. I think we created something that allowed me to have insight on the process. And that was very important for me to understand what the process looks like at that scale. And what is refreshing is that I thought that they were going to be kind of like, okay, no, give us what we need, and then we're just going to create and make products from our warehouse. But they were so involved, and they involved me into that process. And it was really good.
And I think what I love about what you're saying is I think when I started out as a creative, I remember the first sort of murmurs of these big brand collaborations were honestly 2 brands coming together and putting sort of like your logo, my logo. There wasn't a lot of intention or impact behind these kinds of things. And what I love about these collaborations is firstly seeing an artist apply their thought and process to a new medium. Mm-hmm. I think as a consumer, that's really exciting. And also, I think there are so many people that are huge admirers of artists, but the chances of them actually ever owning something that artist has laid their hands or thoughts on is never. So 100%. For me, what I love about it is when done well, it creates this amazing access to an artist, and you get to actually show up and support that artist. And I think that's what I'm really encouraged to see artists not being fearful of trying out these new spaces and sharing their work on a larger scale, because your fans get to actually take a piece of what you've created home. So I think on that, what was the impact that collaboration had on you as a fine artist?
So I'm a multidisciplinary person in general. So
okay.
I'm not afraid of tapping into different worlds and trying out how to make a traditional way of looking at things come to life in different ways. So when they approached me, I think I was very comfortable with the idea because I didn't hold myself back to the constraints of what the art world usually does. Nice. But because I prioritize my fine art as a kind of hierarchy medium, everything else then kind of has to respect the art that I do. And in return, what I did was understand that the medium that I choose to tap into needs to kind of aid that and amplify that voice. And that's how I kind of was okay with the impact of creating different things in the medium that I usually do. But then what that also births, it births a new way of looking at things, because now I can go into my personal studio and experiment with the same materials that maybe I wouldn't necessarily have looked at before. And I think that has helped me expand the way I look at my practice, but also makes me understand where I'm at in my practice as well. Because the comfortability of knowing that, yes, I'm a painter, I use acrylic and I use sand as a very important medium that kind of spans across. The most beautiful part of it was when I said, I only use sand. So how are you going to make sand happen? And they were like, okay, so you want it to be textural. I said, find sand, do something. You know? And I think the demands were that, okay, we understand that you take the medium so importantly that you understand why you want to use that medium across the board. And should I tap into something else, the medium will constantly follow.
Right. Okay. I love that. And then I think how did you feel seeing your work on this global stage? What was that like?
I think, when you work on something for that long and you start seeing, so we had different phases of samples coming into the country and also the shipping. That was also another culture shock of how many things we need to bring into the country to approve. And we couldn't get anyone to help us do that here.
Right.
And they would ask, do you know anyone that can help us figure that out? But the process was so long that it would be a difficult thing to get the works out. So when you work on something for that long, you start appreciating the small joys of how it comes out every sample phase. And then by the time it's in stores, you just hope that it's everything you imagined when you were creating it. And I knew I didn't have control of the outcome. I only had control of the process and I had control of the intention. But I was very happy that it was sold out in a week globally and 2 days in South Africa. And it made an impact on my own life and it made an impact on my practice. And it just made things so much more definitive, where I needed to understand that, okay, should I do this again? This is at the scale and the professionalism I'm going to do it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of trust involved in collaborating, because there's a huge exchange of resources, of ideas, of IP, and selecting who you choose to collaborate with. And I'm going to come back to you on this, on how do you choose who's the right fit for these kind of things. What are the I mean, looking back in retrospect, what are the good questions you think are important to ask yourself when did they approach you or did you approach them for the collaboration?
They approached me.
Okay,
yes.
So if someone approaches you and says, "We love what you do, we want to collaborate with you," what are the questions that go through your mind that you think are important to answer before saying yes? Because
I think from the top of my head, I think, what are you willing to let go of?
Okay, yeah.
What are you okay on compromising? What is the value of your work at that scale and that mass? Are you okay with the damage or the restoration that it does? And do you believe in the project enough or do you believe in your practice and your work enough to let it live in different mediums? And those are the burning questions internally. And then the questions you ask them is, how far are they willing to go with you? Do they trust your process enough to allow you to have creative freedom to explore certain ideas? And in my case, they were free enough under the limits of supply and manufacturing and quality control. And because in art, the function of the actual piece is not necessarily always the first priority. It happens to be that the function of the object is the first priority for the brand that you're working with. And if the function means the bottom line, then it means your bottom line. So I think if it's all in collaboration, that's where the collaboration comes from, is that you're all putting something into this pot and you're trying to create something that can resonate with more than one person, including the people that are coming with you. Because as an artist, you come with your own niche of people that understand you differently. And the brand already has a bigger bowl of people that they can kind of lure in. But then once they have someone else or a different audience, they can then kind of tap into that and use that to their advantage as well. So once you're in agreement with that kind of structure, you then know that, oh, okay, we have something, but it's not always easy. And then once you've, in my instance, I've had collaborations before outside of the H&M one where it wasn't as easy. You know, it takes a lot of questioning where you're like, okay, what am I worth? Some don't want to pay you your worth, and some you have to fight for your worth. And then you have to make them see that you have to nudge and say, listen, I understand that you have the resources, but I have the only thing that has put me in this space, which is the intention. And you need to understand that without that intention, you can't take that. And that's when you start having a push and pull with your worth. And money, as much as we shy away from talking about it, is one of the most important conversations in collaboration, because then it starts with supporting an artist to make a certain kind of commitment, especially at that scale, because you're giving so much of your image. And if they are okay with just licensing your image, your IP, everything at no cost, you might as well have been just doing it for exposure.
Right. Okay, that's really important. It brings to mind, I remember seeing Trevor Sturman post something a couple of years back where he spoke about when you're buying art from an artist, you're actually investing in them being able to do what they do in the future. And I think that I really like that as a way to speak about money. Why is that brand coming to you, and what is it that you're contributing to their greater vision? And I think that's something I've certainly made mistakes on in the past. But I also, what I love about this conversation is often I think artists and creatives are very nervous to speak about money because we're all shy, we tiptoe around it. But it's really helpful to know what is out there, what is it worth, how much are these companies going to invest? That's also something that's been a huge eye-opener for me, is understanding they're not only paying you, they're also going to have to invest in the product and the marketing and the operations. And it's actually really enlightening to understand how much goes into a great collaboration. So thank you for that. I think next I'd love to chat with you, Knox.
Yes.
So Knox, if anyone here has been watching your journey, you are doing wild work over at Adidas. And I think for many young creatives, working with brands like Adi is a dream come true. And in South Africa, it was not even an option a couple of years ago. And we've seen a couple phenomenal ones on our global stage that you've very much walked through that journey with artists and designers alike. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It's really inspiring for a lot of us to just see that that's possible.
Yeah.
You sit in a different space in collaborations.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of just unknowns in terms of as creatives and as artists, how do you approach, say you have an incredible idea that you think is a perfect fit for Adi.
Yes.
How do we get in touch? How do artists and creatives approach this? I know a lot of the time, I'm sure you guys get inundated with these kinds of requests because it's definitely a popular thing to do at the moment to collaborate.
Yes.
Mostly because I think a lot of creatives want, they need resources. They want scale, they want resources, they also want mentorship.
Sure.
So what are some of the things you appreciate on the receiving end from young creatives and artists who have a great idea, but they need the resources of a bigger brand or company to support it?
It's quite a complicated answer. And I think, obviously coming from Adi, I stand here alone, but I really work with like an incredible team that really believes in the idea of building a brand that obviously is global, but has a very local footprint. And I think that's firstly the key element as to why this stuff is so important to us, because particularly on the lifestyle side, we are a creative-centric brand, And so often we get offers from a lot of creatives who have concepts of what they want to do with us. But the one thing I often want a lot of people to realize that these things take time.
Absolutely.
So, once we see the Tebe Magugu collabs and the Rich Mnisis, those things were about like 5 years in the making, So building that relationship with the creative first. And I think also as a brand, observing the universe they've created, right? So I think often when people come to us to ask for, can you, think of this? I often want to think about, do you have a world that you think could add to the world of Adidas, for instance, right? So what is special that you could bring to enhance this thing? So really to kind of ask the question as to what addition or kind of collab do you see happening in here versus slapping on a logo and just kind of putting that out, right?
Yes.
And often you'll find that people want that kind of short thing, so that they'd send it, let's say, in March, and hoping that they could find something in December.
Guilty, right?
But it's also demystifying the process, is that we work seasons ahead, And often it's about observing, okay, who has something quite special that they can add to us, that we can story tell, but also that our product is just an enabler for their world. And often to not think about, if you were to hero it, is that it's so important that the artist or the designer or the creative is the lead in this moment, because there's no kind of demystifying who Adi is. You'll recognize us, but to see us in this form is the gift of collaboration. So I really think that when artists do come is to kind of figure out what is that point of departure that you want to create that we can do differently, but also to maybe start small, like if you're starting to create universes, like whether it's through photography, whether it's through your art, that already weaves in the product, it's so much easier to convince us. And I think the first thing is to start. Start by playing with the garments that exist already. Start playing with the footwear. Customization is a big part of how we start to see, oh, flip, your insights, and that could make something incredible. And eventually we then start saying, okay, let's dig a little deeper. Then it's a tee, then it's pants. And then all of a sudden we're coming to you to be like, hey, there's something here. Would we be able to try maybe a local range? And with the gift of people like Tebe and Rich, who'd been working long before we even knocked on their door, we were able to do something quite historic as global, collabs. So I really do think it's the most important thing is to just do your work.
Yeah.
Do your work, take care of your practice, to the point that Lulama mentioned. You have to be so secure in what it is that you offer, so that by the time we come and we will want to tweak, you're so fast and strong in what it is that you do, that no one can take advantage of you in that way. I know that that's not the case with everyone, because it is something that everyone loves right now.
Right.
But I do think the key thing is to establish what it is that you want to bring to this universe, and how it is that you will stand up for yourself in a very loud business. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
I think something on that topic as well, in terms of collaboration, which I think a lot of many young artists and creatives, when they think collaboration with in terms of on a global scale, they think product or range or merch or whatever you want to call it, or sneaker. But actually, like you said, the ability to actually convert that is very hard and very long, and it's like marrying a brand. It's a really big commitment. And when my colleague Tanya and I went to Paris last year over Fashion Week, and actually very little of it was about fashion. There were so many brands and artists activating and collaborating. They were curating menus at some of the special restaurants there. They put on sonic experiences. So I think something that I also really love hearing you speak about, and I see you do that in your work, is it's not always about a product. Sometimes 100%. It's a workshop. Sometimes 100%. It's about education. And I think as creatives, actually, I think that's, in my experience, sometimes that's a better approach. Think about some of the wild, amazing ideas you have that you feel fit and align with that brand's message, voice, or objectives, and see how you can actually contribute to that, as opposed to what can I take from this brand.
Yes.
And I think that's been a huge learning for me as well, is understanding that as much as it's hard for you to get a yes, it's hard for them to give you a yes too. So you have to find something that's really meaningful for both parties. Knox, I think the next thing I would love to hear from you in terms of collaboration.
Yes.
What to you in 2025 makes a successful collaboration? What are the key things we need to try and achieve? Because I must be honest, I see a lot of them and they fall really flat. They're a waste of people's time and resources, and I just see the product float. And then on the other side, we see these incredible, like some of the Adi shoes that they've released in terms of collaborative spaces with designers and artists that are coveted and kept in boxes as artwork themselves.
Yes.
What do you feel are the differentiating factors there between a successful collaboration and the ones that don't really land?
Yeah, I think it's got a lot to do with the people in the room, so whether it's the artist, whether it is the brand custodians, in making sure that we walk, once we start this journey, it's not just in the product, like you said, but it's how we story tell once it arrives, right? So you've created this product about 2 years ago, and how are we going to get the same excitement that you had when you were sketching it to on the ground when Tabi Singh passes at a store and is understanding the intent that you had when you were writing that down. And I think that takes a lot of investment, So firstly, I think the big thing is budget. Is there a budget to see it through, not only in good quality production that doesn't jeopardize any of the people in the room, whether it's the artist or it is the brand itself, but also is there then a commitment to making sure that once the product lands, we don't just leave it on the shelf. We're making a noise about it. We're inviting people in your world that follow your kind of artwork, and then us, and we build those worlds together. And often that means a lot of risk taking. So an appetite for risk. You cannot do the same things that you do season in, season out for this type of work, right? So it's to kind of break the rules really that you've both created to find something quite beautiful. That takes a lot of resource from an agency to kind of on the ground think of how it is that we showcase this in stills, in videos, the messaging, and who it is that this content reaches, So I think often, obviously, the scale of what we would do would be very different. We've done it at a global scale, and we've also done stuff that's purely for South Africans or the continent at large. And the treatment for that is very different. How a collab might land here in South Africa and Nigeria are very different, and to treat each rollout very differently. Wow. And I think that takes a lot of understanding and also listening to your consumer in terms of what it is they want, rather than thinking for them, which makes it quite... you have to be quite decisive about what it is that you will do. And so we haven't actually repeated doing it with just anyone, because, for instance, the designers that you have seen on a local front have been people who've worked with the brand for so long, and we are able to take feedback from them in the same way they're able to take it from us. And by the time we land and we see the consumer, we really invite you to our world, and luckily we do it in a way that honors kind of like the DNA of ours and the designer, and in that way I think we create something amazing. So I think really is to understand that also, if your brand doesn't really mean it, in the sense that like this is not what you do, like you don't really have the time, your timelines, your production can't support an artist in this, and that's why those beginning conversations are so important. Leave it, like you said, there are other ways to collaborate that don't necessarily mean creating a product. You can support experiences, you can support their projects, and in that way those collaborations also speak to a lot of the credibility of your brand itself, so really there are many ways to kind of leverage credibility in the art world, in the fashion world, and it's really about understanding what it is that you want. Do you want scale? Do you want credibility? Do you want, just a kind of experience in another medium? Do you want to stretch your ability to work in another way? So it's just to really establish what it is, and then after that work with real, robust intent to follow through on all those elements, not just on the product, but how it lands to the consumer.
Love that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think... And I mean, we're actually speaking quite a bit because these big collaborations often work between designers and designers. But then in terms of actually really speaking to artists working with these big brands, something that I think is hugely powerful in that space is that one of the amazing things about art is how much people value art. If you think about how we treat the art on our wall, if you are so lucky to own art, that will live with you until your last breath. It will move from home to home with you. Your guests, you will stand with your guests and you'll speak about it. It's very different to the way we treat clothing. So for me, as someone who loves this world that we're moving into, where we all are aiming to own less, look after it more, value it more, these collaborations with artists are really special because you're able to take the way in which they create one thing that people value more than jewelry, more than clothing, more than their cars. It's this piece that speaks to them and makes them feel a very specific way. And I think the magic in these bigger brands who are all about the bottom line and moving units, and it's really hard for them to hold on to intentionality. And that is what artists do best. Everything they do is surrounded by their intentions. So I think for me, Knox, my last question for you, and I'm asking this to just you as a creative, as someone who's very on the ground and involved in our industry. What are your hopes for young South Africans in terms of our ability to collaborate in these global spaces? Whenever we interact with people from abroad, they're like, what is going on in South Africa? Like, we didn't hear from, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but suddenly it's like musicians, actors, designers, artists, we're everywhere and we're getting these amazing opportunities. What greater impact do you hope that can have back home? Because that's what a lot of us want. We want to come back, right?
I think I loved what you said about, transferring like an artist's work into something quite tangible for the consumer. And I think what's important is for all of us to have buy-in terms of like the real minerals that we have, whether it's in the talent we export, the skill set that is literally bubbling under in our country, to be able to find ways to democratize that so it doesn't just live in an exhibition space, that it can be able to kind of transcend the walls that it was kind of born in. And I think that why I love what's happening now and kind of how we're all cross-pollinating from, our favorite designers doing furniture, for like people exhibiting in such interesting and dynamic ways, is to kind of allow for these things to touch different worlds. And that for me really is what gets me going. Is like, how do we democratize this stuff? How do we make sure that we have scale and references that are so different to what we grew up on? And I think that's starting to happen because everyone is cooking in different parts of the country, and because we have one internet, it's just getting louder and louder. People are confident earlier, they're practicing their crafts earlier. And so really, my own kind of aim is to build that momentum, is to support that momentum, because it's not actually about us. It's just about opening the door and letting people run. And knowing that even if it doesn't work, you've got a soft landing because there are structures in place. There are ways in which you can do it. And there are learnings, to Lulama's point, on how to take it home and to use what you observed in terms of how the machine of Adi works. How do I take that back to mine so that you don't have to rely on us and you can actually do it on your own scale? And that's all it is for me in terms of what keeps me going.
I love that. That's incredible. We'll be there. Thank you, Knox. Gail, I'm coming to you next. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Can you give us an intro into what you do?
Okay, thank you. Well, aside from very proudly being the sponsor for the Talks program,
Yes, thank you for that.
I head up a team of very passionate underwriters and insurers that specialize in the insurance of art. And I say art in a very broad scale. We're talking collaboration here because art is an ecosystem, as you've been talking about. There are some challenging logistics. There are exhibitions where you want to go and showcase your works because otherwise nobody has access to them, if it's just kept in one place. There are collectors and dealers and educational programs. And we like to work and partner with all of the people and entities involved in the ecosystem to provide bespoke insurance solutions to really unleash the potential of these collaborations, make it not so scary, so that if something does go wrong, you've got people who know what to do to either restore, repair, because we're not talking call centers here. We're not talking, please bring me 3 quotes and we can give you another one. Art is very, very unique. There are a lot of different moving parts, different media, different areas, and you want it to go global. You want to support our artists to be able to be seen globally. So I really see us as, almost the smoothing, the lubrication to help in a very collaborative sense, tailor-made, every aspect in the art ecosystem to unleash their potential. I think that's quite a broad summary of what we do. It is more practical than that. It is a very practical aspect, but that is what our aim is to achieve.
Okay, thank you. I think as someone who's didn't study arts, I don't practice it traditionally, but I'm completely enamored by the art world and how it works and how it functions and the bravery of these artists who are often these incredibly intentional, sensitive human beings that engage in these spaces with all of these big moving parts where some of their who they are is up on these walls and in these galleries. And I've had the privilege of meeting so many young artists, like right at the beginning of their careers, before I don't think they even knew what was coming. And one of the shared sentiments, I think, for a lot of them is accessing gallery spaces, accessing mentorship. I mean, it's one thing to come out of, Michaelis with a degree, but actually practicing as an artist, the creation of art is a small part of what you do, but then there's this whole other world that, from my perspective, is extremely daunting. And like you said, there's a lot of learning, a lot of moving parts. Is there a way that young artists can, how do they learn about this? Do they get in touch with you guys? Do they try and fail? Do they try and go through galleries? Do you feel that there's a space within what you guys do where artists in the beginning of their career can come and contact you and ask the questions and find out how they can work alongside you guys?
Well, I think what we're doing today is already a part of
Exactly.
how we're trying to assist.
Yeah.
So, there's the practical insurance aspect, but we also want to support young artists, young collectors through education and through programs like this. So, in sponsorship for talks, a lot of education. We do collaborate with a lot of other entities. I would recommend, from a practical point of view, for new artists, not as an insurer, but from what I've seen in the industry and being around for, I'm actually not going to tell you.
A good amount of time.
A fair amount of time. Is networking and people and relationships. Galleries are hungry for people to come and talk to them and not be scared to go into a gallery space. Go to the openings. Go to the art clubs. Find out where clubs are doing talks. And I think it's by talking to people, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. It can't be a one-size-fits-all. I mean, you've seen and heard from our speakers that it's different. But I think networking within this ecosystem is so important. Listening to what people want and seeing what you can do to either help, support, or how you could add value and find a slot in as an artist or a creative to fill that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Thank you for that. I think something else I was just thinking on as we were speaking is that in terms of the power of art and global brand collaboration, something that is very much rooted in South Africa, for better or for worse, is collaboration. Sometimes it's out of, I think, a sense of community and a sense of, I think a lot of us want to see each other win. And from my experience, it's not like that all over the world. We had a incredible fashion blogger, Fashion Roadman. I don't know if anyone knows him. He was here recently and he was visiting different artists and designers, and he said he's traveled the world doing this, trying to understand different cultural makeups in different cities, and he's never experienced the sense of going to an artist or designer studios and asking them questions and then saying, oh, but have you been to my friend's store? It's on Kloof Street. This is what they do. And I've always thought that that's quite an amazing thing that we have here in South Africa, that because of, I think there are certain resources that we are lacking and certain structures that we are lacking, we are building them as the newcomers, which is a pretty incredible concept. And I think that for me, that's often why these South African collaborations are landing so well, because there's not this I've arrived kind of energy from these incredible artists that we know. They're willing to learn, they want to learn, and they're willing to share these kind of resources also so that they can share what is happening at home with the rest of the world. So
Yeah, no, I was just like in that also, like, I think it's so beautiful that we get to like archive these moments in time, you know, like there's a season when those collabs started, and to see them mature so much is such a beautiful way to kind of like frame them also culturally in terms of where we've been sitting and developing our kind of thing.
When you're talking about how it started, I'm
Yes.
thinking back on the concept of seeding.
Yes.
And how when you are seeded something, you are given an opportunity to imagine it in your own way. And then what happens from there over time has become, especially with my peers, I've seen that we were all in varsity at some point being seeded by Knox and we would change the sneakers, we would be running around Bram after school. But the spirit of just being able to change something because it was given to you was what prompted the creative aspect of where we are now in hindsight. When I think about it, it was it when you look at it, it may have like it seems small, but then now we are able to be free enough to even you know, what do I want to say? You can recommend another artist to a brand because you know you're not the best fit for it. And it happens
totally.
internally. It doesn't necessarily happen publicly, but you're able to say, well, I don't think I'm the best fit for something like this. Maybe if you try the Kolofos, for example, and then that kind of births something completely new.
That is such a good point. We had we got contacted by a company last year for a collaboration, and love the company, they're awesome, whatever. But I just could not. I couldn't figure out how I would be able to execute this well. And I gave them a list of 3 other names that I was like, I think these 3 people would kill this. And Wanda did the most incredible collaboration with Savannah. When I saw it, I was like, you're a genius. I would never have even come close. And that's so true. Sometimes I think the ability to say no to something, not out of, it's not good enough for me, but sometimes it's just not the right fit, and you are able to pay forward that opportunity to someone who is the right fit, and they're going to do it justice. I love that. I think the one other thing I really want to explore with you guys while I have you in the room is what's from your perspective in terms of like young South African artists, what do you think they need resource-wise in South Africa? Because I think there is this sentiment for a lot of South African artists that we are not lacking talent. I think there is still a bit of a sense that there are other spaces in the world that there's a lot more support infrastructure, whether those are incubators or even just funding. How do we get there? Where do we start?
I'd start by saying insurance.
Yay, good answer.
No, honestly,
Yeah.
we create very important work, and as soon as you lose it or break or damage it, it's a process. I had an issue maybe a couple of months ago that I'm still dealing with insurance, that you have to justify why canvas is damaged in this way, and it impacts the studio in tremendous ways, and that can affect how the studio even runs. Had I known that a couple of years ago while starting, I would have started with the process of knowing that logistically I would have had to secure how I kind of save and, protect my work. I think we are talented. I think we have enough audacity to create. I think we know exactly what it is, the boundaries that we're trying to push. We needed just a lot of structural support. and the structural support allows us to create freely. If you have a team, or if you are privileged enough to have a team, even in just someone trusting your ideas, you have something that is supporting your structure, and it is allowing you to build something a little bit more solid, that when the collaboration comes, you can negotiate a contract fairly. And in that aspect, we do not lack talent. That I always try to stress that we do not lack talent. We lack structure, in the sense that it allows us to create a little bit more freely, so that we know what to fight for. And in that, it incubates us in a way that we are allowing ourselves to then trust that our peers are protected. We're not fighting for a pie we think exists somewhere else. We're not fighting someone else because we think they're more talented or less talented. But because of the structure that you put in place, you understand that this is the pie that I'm willing to fight for, and someone else is doing that in their own practice. That way you're able to, again, recommend, protect, and then implement those structures in your practice, so that you can continue growing. Because it is a small business at the end of the day, and it needs to be taken care of like one, so that the structure you have can allow more creative directors to head those departments in your practice, so that you continue to conceptually be liberated enough to do so. So, in all seriousness, it is just protection and insurance.
Yeah.
I should
okay.
mention the right kind of insurance.
Yes, too.
So I2 Art Insure definitely would have helped with that sort of situation. I like what you said about the piece of the pie, because I think with the collaboration with the artists, what I'm seeing is that it's not fighting for your piece of the pie, but the pie just gets bigger, which is really what we're all after.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also to your point is like, you speak about like that structure support that you need. And I think every layer, like you need that artist, you need protection. We need the protection of the work that you're doing. Because often we all steamrolling ahead, because fundamentally, like your marketers also feel like creatives, you want to make noise about it. But we also need to just hold back in terms of like, do we have logistical like plans, timelines that can support this work? If we're all rushing to a deadline, we won't be able to. And I think often it's also demystifying, which is something we're quite passionate about as a team, is like demystifying the process that goes into it and the resources that are there. I think we all have internet access, well, hopefully, and the ideas and the audacity, but often it's just a space to play, So I think often, like, I imagine a world, like, if we could build spaces where, like, people have work rooms, like, they could play with their stuff. I wish we had more centers like that, because I think with creatives playing in the same room, there's so much more that could come from it. And often because people don't have the space to play and stuff, it's always a high stakes game, So you jump on and you say, I can do it, but you haven't had the time to play, get things right, so that by the time a brand is like, okay, let's do this, and you're like, of course they're going to say yes, then we start to pick up, oh, actually, like, there's not enough practice in that. And often the big company doesn't have time to watch that happen.
Right.
So, I'm not saying that in our case, but you have to understand that if you're working towards a season deadline, your creative input, and like, can I sleep on it? I want to change it. There is no environment for that. And so I so wish we could build more environments in our cities, and not just in the major cities, that cultivates workspaces for people to play, that we're able to send Lulama to go speak to them, just to help them understand that this is all within you. It's just about returning to the practice, because there was no textbook that Lulama got to figure out that she can do photography or anything. No. It's by playing. And I think that's why years in the game is so nice. You get to sit having done all of that. And I just wish artists could find that much sooner, so that, we can push this thing to even bigger levels than we're in now.
I hear that. And I think that's also something we as a small, I'm sure in everyone's own capacity, there's this interesting thing that happens in South Africa, because this misnomer of young people being lazy and not wanting to work is absolute nonsense. We get inundated with young people. They're like, can I come watch? Can I come learn? Can I just be there and see how you fold your packages? Yes. Like, how do you order fabric? How do you cost a garment in our world? And the tricky thing about it for us is we still feel like we need a lot of mentorship, but we forget we're at a point now where there are people that are what we've been able to achieve, which we feel is small, is beyond their wildest dreams. So as these small businesses, we're now mentoring. We barely have a team, and we're now in the space where we're like, okay, we want our industry to grow. We don't want to be the only ones there. An industry can't grow off of 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
There needs to be co-opetition where you're all learning and competing and challenging one another to get better. So, and that's what's happening. That's why South Africa in the last sort of 10 years is suddenly this country that people are amazed by, enamored by, because there's just so many incredible stories coming from here, because we're all like, did you see what this person did? Sparks an idea. I can do that in this way in my world. And the word co-opetition, I only heard about it last year. And I was like, we need to get that on a billboard here, because in an industry that's still, in a country, I think, where our creative commerce is still in its infancy, I think we've got a long way to go. There can be a sense of there's only so many opportunities and it's a fight and grab for who gets it. But actually, if the person standing next to you gets that opportunity, it actually means it's possible.
Yeah,
that
it's a
means
win.
you might get the next one and they'll probably tell you how it went and you'll learn from it. And yeah, I think I'm really encouraged. That is not how it felt when I started my journey as a creative. It was highly competitive and lots of closed doors, and no one wanted to speak about the inner workings of how these things went. And it's very different now. I'm grateful. I feel like a lot of us can just call one another and say, hey, how do I do this? And that's really exciting for me. So it builds confidence to know that even if you haven't done a thing, someone has, and they can kind of hold your hand through it. Jules, how are we doing for time? Amazing. Sorry, I didn't look back once. Yeah, we'd love to open the floor to some questions. I know there must be some.
Question that I have.
So, Mike, just behind you, if you don't mind grabbing it.
A question that I have that, yes, there is like these trends happening now and the collaboration and the co-competition or whatever. The thing is that there is a certain crust of artists that have been picked by galleries. And those are the artists that we are seeing, and those are the ones who are being elevated because they are being put in the spaces where people can come to an art fair and see them. Mm-hmm. But behind them, there is 7 other artists that is as deserving and as capable, but they just never do it. And in actual fact, some of them I know personally as well. And I find it very interesting that, yes, that whole thing about networking and community, but in the end of the day, it calculates back to, have you got enough money to buy paint to create the next artwork? And talking about creating spaces where this kind of play can happen and engagement, those are all great ideas, but then how do you roll up your sleeves and actually make it happen? Because as important it is to elevate 1 or 2 artists that are privileged to be able to have big sponsors behind them, the moment you elevate the entire, how can you say, the brand, the band of art making in South Africa or in Africa, you actually benefit everybody else. And to have basic accessibility. Number 1 question that I got asked by artists is, how do I price my work? Mm-hmm. Something as basic as, what is my worth? Now, if you wake up a lawyer in the middle of the night and you say, what is your hourly rate? They will immediately be able to tell you. And if that lawyer is calling in sick, he's not able to actually generate that income the next day because he's a professional and he works per hour. Artists are professionals and they work per hour. But if you wake up any artist in the middle of the night and you ask him, what is your worth? They can't tell you. So the conversation of representing yourself as a professional and a unique individual with a side and a view of the story, those are all educational things that needs to happen. But fundamentally, there is no one go-to place where you can say, how can I develop myself as an artist and put myself on a platform and learn these things about myself? Like most of us don't get taught to balance your statement when you leave school. I find it just the most ironic thing that there's gross amount of artists coming through from really brilliant institutions, but they don't actually know how to market themselves or to make themselves available. One simple thing, for instance, many corporations work on an annual budget basis, which sometimes is 2 years in advance. So if your timing is wrong, your timing is wrong. So where is it? Whose responsibility is it? Is it government? Is it corporate? Is it the new networks? Is it people like the insurers that says, listen, you are now at this level artist, these are your peers, so your work should be at that price. But if you can open the conversation with a brand, for instance, immediately your worth is going to go from there to there. Yeah. So are the corporates willing to walk the way? Is there a place where they are willing to say, oh, listen, we understand that you guys need all of this to ready them for when you come with the questions? Yeah. You know, to ready them for that point where they can go, okay, listen, these guys, they are the guys that we can go and ask the questions because we've now created the opportunity or the space for them to do so.
Anyone want to tackle that?
I can try. I think it starts at the top with the history of auctioneering and fluctuating prices at that level. If you have a deceased artist who is selling 120 million piece over a couple of years, the pricing changes as the value changes of the work, and whoever appreciates the work then, you know, is allowed to change the price. And that has been the base point just throughout history. So when we come into the industry, we then find that the pricing already fluctuates whether you like it or not. And then you are told what your value is through who appreciates your work. By the time you decide what your worth is and you stick to it, someone has already decided for you how much more valued you are. And then you then find yourself in that position where you're like, okay, cool, I've reached a higher level to where I thought I was. And then your work starts gaining more momentum and you find yourself at another level where someone else had decided for you that your work is valued at a different price. So by the time you want to set a price and say, I sell a 120 by 120 centimeter, already you have to start talking dimensions. And then you have to start talking scale. And logistically, that doesn't work. Already you are priced at a no value. So that is a tricky place to start where you have to price your work. And that's why it's so difficult for artists to price their work. It changes every year because the work is valued differently every year. Because the intention of how the artist creates it doesn't come from a place of, okay, I am offering a service that is going to last me for 7 years, and I'm a lawyer, and this is what I do in court. The changes that we make in studio are that we are creating something intentionally that is conceptually a storytelling environment. So the story does change, and then your value does, because as you said, the younger artist does come with a bit more fire, right? And then they value then now succeeds yours. Now you find yourself in a position of having to evaluate your worth in that kind of climate because someone else has already surpassed you in less than a year.
Yeah.
So there's already kind of like this competitive nature around the value because the work is already very kind of intense and you have a lot of stories to tell around it. And that's why it's very difficult to price work like that. And the kind of culture of auctioneering and selling to the highest bidder is so important that you understand that once you do have it, you have something very special. But I do agree with you when you speak about the fact that there needs to be a base point that younger artists understand what they're trying to create so that they're able to afford things like paint. When I, in my own silo, I invite an artist into my studio and say, listen, these are my resources in my studio, you can use what I have. I can only help that much, but we need more resources that are saying, okay, at this price, you can discount paint or canvas and stretching and fabric from these places to be able to aid your studio. And those are the only things that as an artist I can do. But from a higher level, we need definitely more resources to be able to say, I am valued at 9,000 euros and that's where I start. Where I go, it is a choice based on how far I take myself. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
The side. So, in a world where fast fashion and imitation has been normalized, how does one protect the authenticity of a brand that's growing? Because at a smaller scale, it's easy to be authentic. However, once the brand starts getting traction, you just start seeing, you go to China Mall and you start seeing replicas. So how do you protect that authenticity?
It's a difficult one because I think we also often, as obviously a retail company, run into a lot of counterfeits. So from like, football jerseys and stuff. I was in Lagos a month ago and we just saw so much, and it's a very hard thing to manage. But I think often, especially with scale, is to like ensure that there is such a tight program in terms of how many units are made, in terms of like the production part of it, and what the process is after that period that it's on shelf, right? Now, I know that this is not a fail-safe process, but I think in your contracts and when you're having these negotiations is to ask that question is, what happens with the stuff that doesn't move? What happens with, the patterns and all of that in the factory? Because those moments also really make the artist quite vulnerable, in that someone could be like, I actually picked something up and goes and does it for themselves, and now you're seeing it in Belleville, which is fine, but then we can't walk this road with that artist. And I think that's a very important conversation to have, because even your biggest companies still haven't figured it out, So I think it is a nature of the game. But it is also down to like what that production run looks like and the measures in place to ensure that obviously you created such a high value that that counterfeit is so like obvious, you know what I mean? You have to protect that resource. But it's down to that manufacturing ring is so important. And I think people often don't think about that in part of their planning. But it really is to make sure, what is the exit plan for the stuff? Do we destroy it? Do we donate it? Does it go back to the artist? And often in those collabs where we've worked with designers, there are strict kind of contracts in that this stuff after, let's say, 2 years cannot exist, So if you were to see it in a value store, whatever you saw it, you have the right to call and be like, yo, and we would have to pay for that type of thing. So those license agreements are so important and they have to be airtight. And my advice to people also is to think about when it's done, where will that stuff go? And I think it's important that it's returned to the artist, whether they keep it for archiving or the brand itself chooses to keep it. But that's really in asking that, but the risk is there. I think some of your biggest companies haven't been able to get around that. But it's about getting a tighter fix on those processes.
Cool, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? Yes? No? Everybody? Here's one. Thank you.
Hello. I think both Lulama and Nhlengethwa kind of touched on this in different aspects, but I think my question is around how do you not get pigeonholed then, like especially when it comes to product? As an artist, do you think we're beyond that as like multidisciplinary people that we are? I'm thinking about how you spoke about being steadfast in your practice and, kind of being very sure of what it is that you do so that you don't get manipulated or, but do you think that comes with being an established artist? Like, is it, I'm so, people know my name and my practice, so I can now collab and I'm not now a designer or whatever, which is a different thing. Or do you think we're beyond that? Just, thoughts on that. And is it something would you wait till you're a more established artist before you collaborate, or just that, thoughts on that?
I mean, from my own experience, collaborating from a young age was helpful because I had a lot of time to make some mistakes on quite a small scale. So now going into bigger conversations, I have some life experience that I can be like, oh, that's that thing that became a problem last time. I was speaking to an artist literally about this an hour ago, about how every time you do a collaboration, you feel like you learned all the lessons the last time and then something new comes up. But there's no playbook. There's no contract that will always stand for every topic that ever comes up. So you have to try. And I do think that's sometimes waiting to try things when you've made it, that can become quite a perfectionist attitude and you may never try. So I wouldn't say that. And then just on the pigeonholing thing, that's you can, Beyonce released a country album. Exactly. You can pivot when you want to. And I think that's also something that even if someone else is telling you, oh, but you're this kind of an artist, you can change. Fair?
Oh. Hectic. Hi. I agree. I think you choose when you want to bring people into your world. I would say that expansion much earlier is like a good experience. It gives you experience, because you learn so many ways of working. Because if you work alone, which most artists do, that they work alone most of the time, and then they get stuck in their own way of doing things, and you become very stubborn once you start working with other people. I think doing it much earlier with your peers, just as something that still feels light, you might get a round of understanding, oh, okay, this is what I want to put into it. And then by the time you kind of solidify it and contractualize it, then you're good.
Thank you. Jules? Are you happy?
Just before everyone, just an aside from this conversation, and it's been wonderful, participating, is to let everyone know that we've got a gift for everybody in the audience, which is called an RFID card. And basically what it does is from a protection point of view, is if you put it next to your bank card, it stops the scanners from being able to take money out of your card without you intentionally separating them and intending to spend from your card. So please, they'll be available on your way out. Please grab one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.